Hello everyone, this is Dowster with another video, and today I will be talking about the third season of The Dark Side of the Ring. I usually do Marvel or anything Funko, but after I released the Bella Twins rant, I thought I would do something related to WWE today. I used to watch wrestling more in 2006 until 2011 or so, and was streaming the Attitude Era in 1998 on WWE Network, so wrestling was also a part of my childhood. When I watched Dark Side of the Ring Season 1 and Season 2, I always had a lot of stuff and opinions about the show because in my opinion, Dark Side of the Ring is really good and taps into what happens outside the wrestling ring. You think you know your wrestlers, but when you watch this show, it takes it to another level of shock. The first episode is a two-part episode of the late Brian Pillman and his life outside of wrestling. Brian Pillman was a wrestler who worked in WCW, ECW, and WWF before it was called WWE. He was known for his loose cannon gimmick and his crazy promos, one of them involving an actual gun that received major controversy. In this episode, we see his family, former wives, and friends or acquaintances who give insight on who Brian was and how he was very passionate about his wrestling career. I didn't watch wrestling during 1995, but I heard it was really good and that Brian Pillman got so into the insane psycho gimmick that he even blurted out the Booker's name while wrestling a pencil, which at the time the Booker's name was Kevin Sullivan. In the first 10 minutes, we learn about Brian's childhood and why he had such a raspy voice, as if he was chain-smoking. Brian was born on May 22nd, 1962 in Cincinnati, Ohio. His father died of a heart attack when Brian was 3 months old. While still a child, Brian developed throat problems and underwent 31 to 36 operations before he was 3. Most of his childhood he spent at the hospital and went home for Christmas only. His voice was raspy because his vocal cords were scraped off. It was hard for him to breathe. He had surgery performed on a doctor's desk at the doctor's house. He was told to not talk for 3 weeks, but Brian tried to break the boundaries by talking anyway. He was very athletic and played in a variety of sports. Brian played football until an ankle injury that cut his football career short. He then went to the Harp Family and trained to wrestle. The Harp family was known for wrestling and making stars such as Bret Hart and Owen Hart. Brian started off in Stampede Wrestling. He was good friends with Dave Meltzer as they traded tapes so he can write articles about Brian. Dave Meltzer is one of the biggest wrestling observers to this day and is critical for his opinions on wrestlers. Brian then went to WCW thanks to the help of WWE Hall of Fame Jim Ross. Brian went up with the likes of Ric Flair. Rochelle was one of Brian's wives, and they had a child named Britt. Brian had a previous child that he didn't know until a couple months after Brittany was born. His first child was Danny, and became involved with her even though he was no longer involved with Danny's mother. I think it was a one-night stand as they were being interviewed in the episode. Brian's wife Rochelle suffered a lot from an attack that got her bruised on her face, which I think it was a robbery as they mentioned. Unfortunately, it wasn't going to be the last of her traumas. In WCW, he was put in the tag team with Stone Cold Steve Austin, which Austin did not want to be involved in. They were known as the Hollywood Blondes. The Hollywood Blondes were cocky and everyone hated them. And in a way, they were fashionable for wearing vests and using the crybaby gesture when they put their hands around their eyes to make it look like they were crying, or just to mimic people in a bad way, I guess, for their gimmick. Later on, Brian cheated on Rochelle with another woman named Melanie from Atlanta. Rochelle later found out through the phone, and Melanie was pregnant with Brian Pillman Jr. Brian split up and then marries Melanie. Melanie is the widow of Brian Pillman and very controversial in the family. He adopted Melanie's kids as well. In Clash of Champions, the Hollywood Blondes broke up due to low ratings. Austin wasn't happy about it along with JR. At home it was worse. Melanie became toxic and wreaks havoc in Rochelle's life. Melanie tells Brian to file for custody. Melanie has stated that she regrets ruining and making Rochelle's life a living nightmare. by taking away her daughter from her. She did do a lot of drugs as seen on Google with mugshots. There was an incident where Melanie filed kidnapping charges against Rochelle because she thought Rochelle was going to kidnap Brittany, but Rochelle was only hugging her because she hasn't seen her daughter for so long due to the custody battle. One day, Rochelle called and Melanie picked up instead. She then told Rochelle, "Even your own mother thinks I would be a better mother for your daughter than you'll ever be." Rochelle called her mother and told her what she was going to do, and unfortunately shot herself. Brian's sister Linda was the first to know of her death. Brian paid for the entire funeral and felt responsible for her death. Melanie states that she felt awful and regrets for doing it. Brittany blames Melanie to this day for not being such a good stepmom, which is understandable. Brian tried to get more money as his body was starting to give out with age. His contract with WCW was coming to an end, so he then tried to come up with a new gimmick that was out of this world. He tried to choke Bobby Heenan, who at the time had neck problems, and addressed Kevin Sullivan as the Booker Man, which at the time was a big deal and breaking the fourth wall. He wanted to convince people that he was insane and going mad in order to follow Brian's delusional gimmick and how Brian wanted it to be for the gimmick. Brian then went off to WWF. Eric has commented that he wanted Brian's gimmick to work, but in the end it was tricky and just does kind of made sense because a couple years from now, WCW went bankrupt a couple years after 1993. At this time, there was a lot of competition between WCW, WWF, and ECW. Brian then went to ECW, a shock value and out of this world wrestling company who did it to the extreme and received a lot of hate from the crowd for his craziness. Brian then gets Vince McMahon's attention in a trade show with the loose cannon gimmick. In the next episode, they talk about Brian's tragic accident that costed his life and the aftermath. So my thoughts on this episode are positive. I thought it was eye-opening as the other episodes have been pretty good with shock value. There was a lot that I did not know about Brian that kind of wished I had watched him during his time WWF. But I was really young. I really feel so bad for Brittany, who not only lost her mom to suicide, but her father too. I have a friend who at high school had a crappy stepmom and had to move out of the house. So I'm guessing stepmoms are probably just like not so good women after all. I mean, maybe there are some, but there's been a lot of bad stepmothers. What Melanie did was unforgivable, but if she's changed and wants to do better, I think that should help fix problems that she had with the Pillman family, if not maybe a little. As for his other kids, I hope for the best for them because I think their dad would want them to pick better choices and live happy. I also hope that Brian Pillman Jr. becomes as successful as his dad. I do think Brian Pillman should get more recognition. I know he was crazy because of his gimmick, but he did influence a lot of wrestlers, especially Dean Ambrose, who adopted the gimmick Lunatic Fringe, I believe. But it was a good episode, and if you want me to do more of the Dark Side of the Ring reviews and what my opinions are, comment down below, like, subscribe. But this is Delster, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.